Eleanor and Thomas Whitaker were the couple everyone envied. She, the graceful socialite. He, the respected judge with an impeccable reputation. But behind the grand facade of their picture-perfect marriage, secrets festered. And when Thomas was found brutally murdered in their elegant home, all eyes turned to the one person no one ever suspected, his seemingly perfect wife. In the quiet, affluent town of Brooksville, nestled between manicured lawns and ivy-covered gates, Judge Thomas Whitaker and his wife Eleanor seemed to live the kind of life others only dreamed about. He was a man of high standing, known for his sharp mind and unwavering integrity. His court rulings were often quoted in legal journals, and he had a reputation for fairness that few could dispute. Eleanor was no less admired. With her refined manners, charitable work, and striking beauty, she was often described as the embodiment of grace. The community saw them as the perfect couple, well-matched, elegant, and deeply in love. Their home was a sprawling Georgian-style estate on Hemlock Drive, one of the most desirable streets in town. It was the kind of house that drew admiration from passers-by, grand but not ostentatious, with white columns, perfectly trimmed hedges, and the faint scent of roses lingering in the air. Inside, family portraits lined the hallway, and everything seemed to be in its place, as if nothing ever went wrong behind those walls. Holiday lights were always perfectly strung, dinner parties hosted with seamless charm, and every event featured Eleanor smiling at Thomas as though he hung the moon. Those closest to them, however, noticed things others didn't. Eleanor had become quieter over the years, more reserved. She declined invitations she once accepted enthusiastically. Her once vibrant personality appeared dimmed, as though something inside her had been slowly fading. Still, she always had a polite excuse. She was tired. She was busy with charity events. She needed rest after traveling with Thomas to one of his legal conferences. People accepted her reasons. After all, life behind closed doors was never truly visible to outsiders. When Eleanor posted a glowing tribute on their 15th wedding anniversary, complete with old photos, warm memories, and a caption about finding peace in partnership, it renewed the town's admiration. Comments flooded in. Couple goals. True love does exist. You two are amazing together. No one questioned it. No one saw it as anything but sincere. But under the surface, a much different story was unfolding. The couple had stopped, attending events together. Eleanor was spotted several times at the edge of town, alone, sitting in her car for long stretches at a roadside cafe. She was seen once visiting a domestic violence support center, but no one mentioned it aloud. Maybe they thought it wasn't their business. Maybe they didn't want to believe something dark could exist within such a perfect shell. Everything changed on a cold February night when sirens broke the calm of Hemlock Drive. Neighbors peeked through curtains to see flashing lights and yellow tape. Officers moved quickly, sectioning off the grand entrance to the Whitaker estate. The news spread fast. Judge Thomas Whitaker was dead, murdered in his own home. And the person who called it in, the only one present, was Eleanor. In a matter of hours, the perfect marriage was shattered, and the illusion of perfection that had hovered over Hemlock Drive for years came crashing down. The night Judge Thomas Whitaker was murdered began like any other in Brooksville, calm, orderly, uneventful. Rain had started to fall in thin sheets, casting reflections of streetlights across wet pavement. Around 9:45 p.m., a frantic 911 call came in from Hemlock Drive. Eleanor Whitaker's voice, strained and breathless, reported a violent break-in and her husband's death. Police arrived within minutes to find the grand home strangely silent. Inside, the scene they encountered told a story very different from the one Eleanor had given. Judge Whittaker's body lay sprawled across the living room floor, partially slumped near the stone fireplace. Blood was everywhere, soaked into the carpet, splattered on the walls, and staining the base of the furniture. His chest had been pierced with multiple stab wounds, and the fireplace poker, bent and bloodied, was found beside him. The brutality was undeniable. This wasn't a quick or clean killing. It was frenzied, rage-filled, and deeply personal. Eleanor stood in the corner of the room, her white blouse untouched by the blood that covered the crime scene. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she trembled as she answered initial questions. She claimed to have gone out for a walk to clear her head. When she returned, she said she found her husband like this, already dead. Officers noted the absence of forced entry. Doors were locked, windows secure. Nothing appeared stolen or disturbed. The home's alarm system had been turned off earlier that evening, a curious detail that Eleanor could not clearly explain. As detectives began their investigation, they focused on piecing together the final hours of Thomas Whittaker's life. The coroner estimated the time of death to be between 8:30 and 9:15 p.m., well within the time frame Eleanor said she was away. But suspicions grew quickly. Forensics found smudged fingerprints on the fireplace poker and knife, both traced back to Eleanor. Even more troubling, technicians discovered that the home's security cameras had gone offline at exactly 8:17 p.m., manually shut off from the system's control panel. Only 2 people in the house had access to that panel, Thomas and Eleanor. Digital forensics unearthed more disturbing information. Eleanor's tablet showed that she had searched for phrases like, "How to disable home cameras," and "What does self-defense look like legally?" weeks before the murder. Though these searches were deleted, they were recovered from the device's backup. When questioned, Eleanor stated she was working on a crime fiction writing project, an explanation that left investigators unconvinced. Neighbors reported that no one entered or exited the house during the time Eleanor claimed to be gone. One security camera from across the street had a partial view of the Whittaker driveway. Footage from that night showed no activity between 7:45 and 10 p.m. In the days that followed, the narrative that once surrounded Eleanor, the elegant, loyal, loving wife, began to erode. The evidence was mounting. Her story was unraveling. And the deeper investigators dug, the more it seemed that Eleanor Whittaker knew far more about her husband's brutal death than she was willing to admit. The trial of Eleanor Whittaker became the most sensational case Brooksville had ever seen. Every local news station covered it, and within days, national outlets picked up the story. The idea that a beloved judge had been murdered in his own home, and that his seemingly devoted wife was the primary suspect, captivated the public. The courtroom was packed every day, with reporters, curious residents, and legal observers all eager to witness the unraveling of what had once seemed like a perfect marriage. The prosecution painted Eleanor as cold, calculating, and manipulative. According to their timeline, she had spent months plotting her husband's murder, researching how to disable the home's security system, and ultimately waiting for the right moment to strike. They highlighted her internet searches, the lack of any forced entry, and the forensic evidence placing her fingerprints on both the murder weapons. The prosecution claimed that Eleanor had grown resentful of her husband's control over her life, and that, rather than seek divorce and risk losing financial support, she had chosen murder. But the defense presented a different story, one that shocked many in the courtroom. Through witness testimony and psychological reports, they revealed a side of Judge Thomas Whitaker that had never been seen by the public. Behind the polished persona of a fair and intelligent judge, they argued, was a man who dominated every aspect of Eleanor's life. Friends of Eleanor took the stand to share moments when she appeared withdrawn, anxious, and fearful. A former maid testified about hearing arguments late at night, screaming matches followed by eerie silence. More compelling were the medical records. Eleanor had visited the emergency room 3 years before the murder, with bruised ribs and a fractured wrist. She claimed at the time she had fallen down the stairs, but now the defense used that visit as evidence of long-term domestic abuse. A therapist's testimony further supported claims that Eleanor had been emotionally manipulated and isolated by her husband. Her every move, from the friends she was allowed to see to the money she could spend, had allegedly been monitored. One of the most disturbing revelations came from Thomas Whitaker's personal devices. Investigators had discovered audio files, private recordings made by the judge himself during his arguments with Eleanor. In them, his tone was menacing, cold, and commanding. While no outright threats were made, the recordings revealed a pattern of intimidation and coercion that stunned many who had respected him. The defense argued that the murder was not premeditated, but a tragic act of self-preservation. They claimed Eleanor had finally broken under years of abuse and snapped in a moment of fear and desperation. Though she never took the stand, her silence became its own kind of statement, an image of a woman who had suffered in silence for too long. As the trial progressed, the clear-cut image of guilt the prosecution hoped to establish grew increasingly complicated. Eleanor was no longer seen as simply a wife who killed her husband. She became a figure of mystery and debate. Some saw a murderer in disguise, others a victim finally pushed to the edge. The truth, it seemed, lay somewhere in the uneasy space between. The jury in Eleanor Whitaker's trial faced a daunting task. Over the course of several weeks, they had listened to hours of testimony, examined piles of evidence, and watched as two sharply conflicting narratives unfolded before them. On one side stood the prosecution with its mountain of forensic data and a clear argument for premeditated murder. On the other was the defense, with its disturbing portrait of a woman allegedly trapped in an emotionally abusive marriage, possibly driven to kill in a moment of survival. The public watched with growing fascination as the case reached its final stages. Opinion was divided. Eleanor had supporters who saw her as a woman wronged. Others were convinced she had carefully orchestrated the murder of her powerful husband. Both legal teams delivered passionate closing arguments. The prosecution reminded the jury of the meticulous planning involved. Her internet searches, her fingerprints on both weapons, the tampering with the security system, and the lack of any sign of an intruder. They argued that Eleanor had waited until the moment was right, disabled the cameras, and killed her husband in cold blood. The motive, they said, was control, financial security, freedom from a domineering partner, and the opportunity to rewrite the story of her life. The defense countered with a plea for understanding. They acknowledged the violence of the crime, but pointed to the years of psychological torment that led up to it. They painted Eleanor not as a monster, but as a woman silenced for too long, pushed beyond her limits, and reacting to a moment of intense fear. The jury, they argued, had to look beyond the physical evidence and consider the invisible wounds she had carried. When deliberations began, tension outside the courthouse was palpable. Reporters camped out for updates. Legal analysts speculated on every possible outcome. Inside the deliberation room, the jury wrestled with difficult questions. Did the brutality of the killing undermine the claim of self-defense? Was there enough doubt to acquit her? Or did the abuse she allegedly endured offer enough reason to believe her story? After 4 days, the jury returned with a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the decision. Not guilty. Gasps rippled through the audience. Eleanor remained expressionless at first, then lowered her head, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The prosecutor looked stunned. Reporters rushed outside to deliver the breaking news. Within hours, the verdict dominated headlines. Some called it a miscarriage of justice. Others called it a rare moment of legal compassion. The public remained deeply divided. Supporters of the verdict argued that it sent a powerful message about recognizing the hidden trauma behind domestic abuse. Critics insisted that a murderer had just walked free. What no one could deny was that the jury's decision had shaken public confidence in what justice looked like. The trial had raised painful questions about what happens when private torment meets public tragedy, and whether the courtroom can ever fully capture the truth that lies behind closed doors. In the weeks following her acquittal, Eleanor Whitaker disappeared from public view. The estate on Hemlock Drive was quietly sold, and moving trucks were seen parked outside early one morning before sunrise. By the end of that week, the house that had once stood as a symbol of elegance and success was empty, its curtains drawn, its garden overgrown with weeds that hadn't been there before. It was as if the life once lived inside had evaporated. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed Eleanor had changed her name and moved to a remote cabin in the mountains. Others whispered that she'd taken a large sum of money from a hidden account and vanished abroad. A few believed she had checked herself into a secluded retreat to heal from years of trauma. No one could say for certain, and Eleanor gave no interviews, released no statements, and left no trace on social media. Her silence only deepened the mystery, fueling endless speculation about what had really happened inside the Whitaker home. Brooksville, opinions about the case remained divided. Some residents still referred to her as that woman who got away with murder, convinced the justice system had failed. Others defended her fiercely, arguing she had been pushed to a breaking point by years of psychological abuse. Coffee, shop debates, online forums, and town council meetings occasionally erupted into heated arguments when her name came up. The case had left a permanent crack in the community's polished surface. Journalists tried to dig deeper. True crime podcasters and documentary producers revisited the evidence, hoping to uncover some overlooked detail that might tilt the narrative one way or the other. But there was no new footage, no new witness, no sudden confession. The story had reached its legal conclusion, but the truth remained elusive. Even those who had worked the case admitted that, despite the verdict, something about it never sat quite right. There were still too many unanswered questions. Why had no blood been found on Eleanor's clothing? Why had the cameras gone dark so conveniently? And if she had been planning to leave her husband, why hadn't she filed the divorce paperwork that was drafted and saved on her computer? Some believed she had carefully staged the scene to look like self-defense. Others argued that survivors of long-term abuse often act irrationally in moments of trauma. The truth, whatever it was, lay buried beneath layers of speculation and silence. Years passed, but the case never truly faded. It became a cautionary tale told to law students and discussed in criminal psychology courses. Eleanor Whitaker became a symbol, either of justice denied or justice finally served, depending on who you asked. Her name was etched into the public consciousness, a reminder that behind even the most perfect lives, darkness can fester undetected. In the end, the only certainty was this: a man was dead, a woman was free, and the full story of what happened on that rainy February night would never be fully known.